and the plan is to try and build a cheapest chips Japanese pit bike. So why would I try and build a pit bike out of a bunch of parts? Well, it all starts with this race that we do here in South Africa called the Moto Cheapie. And Moto Cheapie basically is a race that sort of is trying to cheapen motorsport and bring it down to sort of an attainable level and have fun for everybody with a very tight budget. So the idea is you've got 5,000 Rand to spend on a bike and you've got to race it around a dirt track for 4 hours. You can have a team up to 4 people and you sort of relay race, and the whole idea is to see how many laps you can complete in 4 hours. So we've done this event multiple times. We've used all sorts of different Chinese pit bikes. We've stood on the podium a couple of times. It's been one of the biggest, most fun events I've ever done. But it got me thinking, if only I could have Japanese quality and performance, but at a budget price point. And the only way you can do that, I think, is to build one yourself. So I've got a bunch of scrap parts here. I'm going to show you how I plan to put these things together to build something in between a KLX110 and a CRF110, but with all sorts of funny parts that I've got lying around and some that I've bought, and hopefully stay within the 5,000 Rand budget and make it to race day. All right, so these are some of the parts I've got. We'll start over here. I actually bought a bunch of KLX110 parts from a guy who strips them down and makes full mods out of them, so he doesn't use any of the suspension parts. So I've got a KLX110 swing arm, I've got 2 wheels, I've got forks, triple clamps over here, and this big old frame, which is from a Honda Wave, which is some sort of 125cc moped, which I picked up on Marketplace, super cheap. And here's the motor. So this thing is electric start, 4-speed, 125cc, semi-auto, and hopefully it runs. The guy that sold it to me told me that it does. It's got good compression. It's got no wiring, which is going to be a challenge. And yeah, the idea is to copy the geometry from a CRF110, which is the bike I race typically for pit bike racing, and sort of make it into a cheap budget version using as much as possible Japanese parts so we can get through this grueling 4-hour race. So I'll just give you a little bit of a tour of what I've got available in my workshop. I'm not a fabricator. I am an industrial designer, so I can design and use CAD and everything, but I've got sort of limited tools. But the plan is to use as much as possible what I've got, and then I will call in some reinforcement for welding. So I've got 3D printers. I have a baby little lathe over here. That's probably going to work quite hard on this project. I have some drill presses and pneumatic tools, sandblasting cabinets, and in my cupboards I've got various different things like angle grinders, saws, and a few other things. So I've taken a pretty good side view after propping up the bike. I don't know if you can see it there. And I'm going to take that over into CAD and kind of sketch it up just to get an idea of how the frame is going to have to be chopped up to match the head angle and the head tube from the geometry that we're going to copy from a CRF110. So starting off in CAD, I basically just sketched up a few sketches to try and sort of figure out where we are, the basics of the wheel diameters, the head angle, and just the base wheelbase. And then the fork lengths from the KLX forks that we have, and the head tube length. So those were the first dimensions I used. I then moved into doing some suspension calculations just in terms of rear wheel travel, shock length, and a few other sort of dimensions. And during the process I was moving between a sketch from the CRF110 owner's manual as well as my own bike to try and scale that up and just compare the two.
and then also imported the actual frame and motor from the Honda Wave, just to get some sort of reference of where it would sit.
Okay, I've just finished up a pretty lengthy little experiment in CAD to see whether this would actually work, and it's worth, you know, sort of trying to rescue the rear part of this frame. And it seems like it will all work. I just have to get rid of this whole subframe, trim the back off, and then also trim off these tabs. So yeah, I'm just going to get stuck in with the angle grinder and just remove all the unnecessary sort of tubes.
We stretch time, we stretch life, we stretch time, we stretch life.
The swing arm is actually not, it's actually a little bit asymmetric, so I've got to try and figure out how this wheel sits in accordance to the center line of the frame. So I'm going to assemble up the rear wheel and then measure it up and then try and see how much I need to modify these tabs on the back of this frame to make this bolt on. Luckily, the axle diameter is the same, and it looks like this swing arm should, with a bit of luck, just bolt straight onto this frame. So So the tabs on this frame are a little bit wider than the tabs on the swing arm. So I'm going to use my little diagram that I've just made up to figure out where the center is, and then figure out how much I need to cut off on either side so that my swing arm sits centered. Okay, so I've been grinding, which took me a lot longer than I expected. I've measured out these tabs. I think if my maths is correct, the swing arm should just come and bolt straight on. But let's see. So here's the moment of truth.
We stretch life, we stretch time, we stretch life.
It's actually going to work. There is a bit of a sort of tight clearance happening over here. I need to go back to the CAD drawing and see how far the angle is that this actually has to sort of go backwards, and then I have to check whether I actually have to cut out or make some sort of clearance in the frame. I was hoping not to have to do that, but if I have to, it's not going to be the end of the world. I think I would just end up having to cut out a small notch in the rear of the frame. But yeah, I don't think it's the end of the world if I have to. It would just be a line going across and a little bit of a V. So this was our previous Moto Cheapie race weapon. It actually did, I think, about 3 Moto Cheapies. It was super reliable. It was just a Chinese sort of pit bike with a swing arm, you know, sort of Honda CRF50 copy kind of thing. Out of the Chinese pit bikes, it was actually pretty reliable, pretty good, but still just didn't handle very well, and yeah, we, needed some improvement. This one actually had an impact with a tree. We had a collision mid-race, managed to invert the forks, swap them around, get them to kind of work, and we rode this bike for 3 hours like this, and actually ended up in 4th place with yeah, half an hour of working on the bike in the bush to try and make it rideable again. But yeah, this is how we raced it. You can see the frame's completely bent, forks are completely bent, they're twisted around the opposite way. So yeah, the idea is to try and steal this thing's head tube. Hopefully I can use that on the new frame. It's got a decent head tube on there and this frame's not worth anything. So I might as well try and get something from the frame. So a little progress update. I've built a little box over here and it is basically to mount the motor on top of. That's been calculated to get the motor exactly in the right position according to the CAD calculations. So it's got two holes in it there. It's going to be bolted to the foot peg mounts on the motor. And then there is a big piece of wood on my counter here, which is going to serve to be the base plate for the jig. So everything's just going to screw over onto that base plate, and yeah, then we're going to use this to try and work out the rest of the geometry of the bike frame. So there it is. That is my exact motor height sorted out. I've drilled bigger holes than there needs to be. Oh, and there goes the power. I've drilled bigger holes than there need to be in the box itself. That's just so that I can adjust the angle of the motor. If this wheel touches this jig, then this is in the right position. So basically, we're getting close. I just need to tie this down and then brace up the front wheel and get that in position so we know what to build on the frame.
I just got stuck into this area with the angle grinder and notched out a little bit of space there so that the swing arm can actually fit on full extension. So now the wheel's actually touching the jig and things are starting to look slightly better positioned. So I just needed to check that on full travel the swing arm isn't going to actually hit the frame, and this bike's only got about 110 mils travel and it's reaching 170 mils travel, so even on a really harsh bottom out it should be fine. So that's all looking really good. Alright, it's the time to cut off this head tube, and whew, a bit nervous. I want to try and cut this off neatly, or as neatly as possible. It looks like this head tube is very close to the positioning of where my head tube needs to be. So if I can cut this weld really neatly and this gusset, hopefully I could use the little bit of the mitering that's already been done to the tube. I might have to adjust it a little bit because I think there's a difference in the head angle, but yeah, I'm going to cut this head tube off and then we'll see how close we are to the ideal wheelbase. I'm not actually concerned if it's, you know, a centimeter or two less or more than my intended wheelbase. I'm already a little bit over in terms of making it slightly longer. That said, the wheel is slid all the way forward in the swing arm, so if we're a little bit short, we can also extend that out and we'll get roughly within a centimeter or two of where I want to be. So let's cut this thing off. Okay, so that's it for this video. In the next one, we'll look at installing the rear shock and getting that all mounted, and then starting the subframe build. If you like this video, please consider subscribing, and we'll see you in the next one.